Hello, and welcome back once again to the Inquisitor podcast with me, Marcus Cauchi. Today, my guest is Lloyd Stokes. Lloyd is a director at Source. They are recruiters into the SaaS, tech, startup, and scale-up market. And today's episode, we're going to be exploring fun questions like, did you hire them that way or make them that way? What part did you contribute to the outcome you say you don't want? How long has that been going on for? And what have you done to change it already? Who knew that you actually have choice? Well, if you're in this market and you're in tech, chances are you're probably millennial or Gen Z. There are a handful of us fossils left over. The majority of senior management and leadership are millennial now, and then Gen Z form about 30% of management already. They have very different perspective on life. They grew up in a very different era. You have to remember that these generations formed their understanding of the economy. They grew up selling during boom time. 2010 to 2024 was shooting fish in a barrel. 2023, February, BlackRock, Y Combinator, and a couple of the others decided they changed the rules and moved the goalposts. Instead of revenue at any cost, go after market share, new logos, and scale, they suddenly said you had to make profit. You had to collect cash. And we got 15 years of managers and leaders and salespeople who've never had to make a profit before. So meanwhile, the investors have carried on wanting their scale and their growth. They've got valuation targets to make. And we saw 300,000 SaaS people laid off last year. So we're going to dig deep and we're going to look in the ugly mirror. It's not going to be a comfortable episode. And chances are there are going to be questions that we'll be asking that will make you cringe. That's the intention. Because my big question for you is, what are you doing to prepare for what's to come? This year, I believe, is the beginning of a peak of the crisis that began in 2008. And we're seeing it play out geopolitically. The world is full of uncertainty. 50% of the democracies on the planet have a general election this year. And AI has come onto the scene. There are an awful lot of bad actors. And the conditions are generally moving towards recession, certainly in the West. China looks like it's going into a very dark period, and that's going to affect global supply chains. If you manufacture products, if you have customers who manufacture products, you're going to be affected by all of this stuff. So at a micro level, the only thing you have control over is how you choose to respond and how you prepare. And that's what this episode is all about. So you're going to face some tough times ahead, and people come to you to help them make the decisions they're afraid to make on their own. And this is a leadership role. Selling is a leadership role. You don't need the title. You need to do the behavior and have the right intent. So without any further ado, Lloyd, welcome.
Thanks, Marcus. Great to be invited on. There's a lot there. There's quite a few things that and stats that I actually wasn't aware of. The 30% of management already Gen Z is quite incredible. And yeah, I agree. I think that there's a lot of change in the world and there's a lot of uncertainty. And I recruited through the credit crunch, which was hard and painful, but fast, really. Like in the grand scheme of things, it was fast. It happened fast and it went fast. And then since 2010, certainly I've been in sales and I've been in recruitment roles. And I think when you reflect back on it, actually up until last year, you had 13 years of good times. Yeah, really good times. So yeah, it's I'm looking forward to going into this and talking about some of the things that we've seen and experienced and just general thoughts as well.
Let's start with the tech model. The tech model has typically been driven by venture and private equity money. And the model has historically been about driving scale, revenue capture, market share, new logos, and really trying to scale. And that tended to mean overhiring, a tendency to try and turn the whole go-to-market process into a factory approach. And as a result, we've created these armies of SDRs who, frankly, are outmatched and outgunned because they're being asked to speak to the most senior people who make decisions and allocate funds within a business when they have no acumen, no experience, and they're taught to talk about products, features, and functions, or to try and get the customer into pain. And they're dealing with some wily, hairy-ass 56-year-old who's been around the houses and been through 7 recessions before. That's a pretty unfair battle. That's the same as a drunk and a black belt. The drunk might land an occasional punch, but they're going to end up on the floor and wounded.
What's been interesting for me is that when I started in recruitment, I recruited into tech, but also into other sectors. Media, business information, insights and intelligence were the main areas that I focused on. Back in 2007 was when I started. And through that period and with those industries, and still within those industries, they hired, you were either new business or account management. But in a lot of those industries, you would hire people who could do both. And they would be responsible for sourcing, prospecting, pitching, closing, and then managing those relationships. And it was always a real challenge, actually. And clients always used to say, yeah, it's hard to find people who can do both. And it is hard to find people because you do naturally, the kind of hunter farmer, it was the term that most people used and still do in some spaces. I understood why, and I could see the reasoning around kind of breaking down the functions into, I think you said, a factory. The go-to-market process became a factory. And so
a pin factory. So someone would hammer out the metal into a wire, and then someone else would cut it, then someone else would sharpen it, then someone would hammer out the head, and someone else would glue the head to the pin, and then someone else would polish it. Isn't that marketing, sales, customer success, operations, and everyone else, who plays a part? But none of them are connected. Yep. They all have different objectives. They're all driven by different metrics. They're not serving the same job to be done, which should be the customer's outcome.
If you think about any technology that you've bought to use, any SaaS platform that you've bought, we just very recently invested in something new for the business, which is going to help us on the automation side of things, I hope. It's fascinating to go through that as a consumer. We had an SDR who did all of the initial outreach. We had, and bear in mind, we were an inbound for them. So we still had the SDR qualifying and doing it all. We then had an AE who jumped onto the sales call and took us through the demo of the platform. And we were a fairly easy customer. We'd already done our research. We'd already looked into the available options. We considered a couple of other things. And within 5 days, we'd been in a negotiation, but within 5 days, we said yes. What then happened is yesterday, we had our first kickoff call, which was with the AE who closed the deal and the lead CS person. And actually, one of the people in my team said the AE didn't need to be on that call. That there was no reason for that AE to be on that call at all. I think if you are customer centric, then you're missing a trick. Actually, if you don't look at and consider the fact that there's actually some exceptional salespeople out there who can do that whole process, and actually will probably be the best prospector, the best closer, and the best account manager in your business. And they can do all three. And actually, as was the way when I started in recruitment, you'll pay a lot of money for that person because they can do things. And that journey, that customer, what would happen now if those tech companies changed their model and actually said, well, actually, let's test this and let's see what happens to our customer churn if we actually keep somebody through the process all the way through and they manage that account long term. I guarantee the churn goes down.
Interestingly enough, when you adopt 2 simple changes, your investors and board and leadership are willing to give you 1 to 2 sales cycles to turn the ship. Then you can create pipeline certainty for everyone. And pipeline certainty means revenue certainty. And if you do 2 things, the first thing is you become customer centric, not investor or seller centric. And the second thing is you move your prospecting focus to the medium term. So you focus on people who are passive looking i.e., they're nowhere near ready to buy. And at no point at this stage should you be having a sales conversation or trying to create any sense of urgency. In fact, you should never do that, because when you do, you actually cause their brain to perceive you as a threat. Now, I cannot see any circumstance under which that is a long-term win. Yes, you might win the transaction. And if your business model is all about wham, bam, thank you, ma'am, then fine and dandy. But if what you're trying to do is prospect for a customer for life, now that's a really interesting shift, because your intent is totally different. And if you are somebody who has to do the full service, you pay a great deal of attention to what actually happens downstream, so that you don't create additional work and create terrible problems and customers who churn. So let's start with the intent. What's the purpose when we hire somebody? What's the job to be done?
That question, I don't ask that question in that way, but I absolutely should, because a lot of the work that we do is with founder-led early stage businesses where they're looking to build a sales team from scratch. And invariably the conversation, it's changed a bit recently, but it generally goes like, hi, I've been told to speak to you, or we've been put in contact with you. I hear that you help to do this. Yes. We're looking to hire a couple of SDRs. And so my question is, why? And invariably, especially if they're first time founders and they don't come from a commercial background, it'll be because they've been told to. And one thing that you know about these individuals, generally these founders, is that they are typically academically very smart. And because of that, they are well read and they read a lot and they consume a lot of information, whether it be through whichever form you like. But they also have access to lots of advisors, because if they've gone through the VC program, then the VC, one of the things they'll do is they'll say, well, you need to speak to this. And so they could be speaking to 10 plus advisors who all have different agendas, who are all giving them different bits of information. And I don't understand how this happens, but then they come to us and say, well, we need to hire 2 SDRs. And I'm like, okay, fine. Who are those SDRs going to report to? Because if you want to hire SDRs, then they're going to need to be coached and developed. And there's nobody in your business who can sell at the moment. But that question of when you're hiring, what's the reason? Why do you need to make that hire? And what do you need to...
I'd go just a little bit further. And the question is this, Lloyd, tell me this, that you've hired this person and they've been in post 18 months, 2 years, and you're just about to promote them. What have they accomplished between now and then? Okay. And if they accomplish that, what will be good about it? How will that affect other people further down the value chain? How will that affect your AEs? How will that affect your customer success? How will that affect management? So what are the factors that really contribute to someone being able to deliver those outcomes? What are the habits that they need? What are the values that through which they need to filter their decisions so that they're consistently delivering to your brand standards and they're delivering the outcome that the customer wants so that they keep coming back and refer you? No one thinks about that stuff.
No one asks those questions. But then also when you think about it, if you were to ask those questions in a different way to the typical profile of an SDR in most businesses, they wouldn't be able to answer those questions either, because typically they're under 25 and they're first or second jobbers who have come straight out of education, and most of the time have no idea what they did. They don't even know if they're any good at what they're doing or if they should be doing what they're doing. They're most of the time doing it because someone's told them they should, or their friend's doing it, or whatever the other reasons are. For that business, that founder, those leaders are investing the most critical part of their sales process in people who are junior and often poorly trained, or sometimes not trained at all, to have sophisticated conversations a lot of the time with an audience of people that they can't possibly engage with.
What's the greatest single point of failure in a car that could jeopardize your life?
Brakes.
Tires. They're the things that touch the road.
Yeah.
Okay. And again, people try and skimp on the price of their tires. That's madness, because that depends on stopping distance, all sorts of stuff. And if they're worn thin or they burst, you don't have control. Well, again, we've got to start looking back at first principles. What is the job to be done?
Yeah.
Well, if we look at marketing, if we look at the whole business development chain, the job to be done is to recruit and enlist the right type of customers who stay with you for a very long time and bring their wealthy friends. That's what we all really want as sellers and as business owners and as managers, because that means we have consistency, predictability, and an easy life. But what is it we do to prevent that from happening? I've come to a really simple conclusion. Selling is binary. Buyers want to make the right decision. They don't want to make the wrong decision. It's as simple as that. If we do anything to trigger their brain to perceive us as a risk, then that is harmful. If we do things that cause them to feel safe beside them on their journey, then miraculously they invite us in and we create intimacy. Now, intimacy is the most important operator in the trust equation. Trust equals credibility plus reliability plus intimacy over self-orientation. And this then brings us to the next really important point. We can say we're buyer-centric, but do we have a you win, then I win as a symptom mindset? Or do we have an I win, then you win mindset? Because they look identical until the end of the quarter.
As you were talking, one thing that we talked earlier on about as well about this factory, the go-to-market process factory. I can't help thinking that we've really overcomplicated the whole process by breaking it down into such small parts and saying these are all individual things and they've got to all try and work together.
Why are they doing it? Why have they chosen to break it down in such small parts? What's the thinking behind it? Motive, cause, and intent.
To your point, I think the reason why people do it is because they're driven. So the driver is around number of customers and customer acquisition rather than value driven to the customer and quality of customer. So there are loads of reasons, but if you are set on delivering numbers to an investor, which says we will have by this point,
that's the job to be done. It's
exactly.
No longer to serve the customer in a unique and effective way that delivers incontrovertible value that causes them to be highly satisfied that they got the outcome that they intended when they invested with you and they rented your service or product.
Yep.
And instead, it's now to make a valuation target. And it's all down, I think, to giving management and leadership the illusion of control. Because if we think about it, and we've got a triangle, down one side you have revenue, and the base you have strategy, and on the other side you've got relationship. Where does everyone fixate? On the revenue. And do they focus on the inputs or do they focus on the outcomes? Well, what do they measure? They're all obsessing about the outcomes mostly and vanity metrics in terms of inputs. Now, what really matters is the relationship. But the strategy to develop the relationship isn't about the relationship. It's to meet the valuation target, because the real job to be done is to meet some vanity metrics. So a financier can put a few lines through and say, well, we can save some money here, here, and here, because these aren't human beings. They're just lines on a balance sheet. And I think this is where, I don't know if you're seeing it, but I'm certainly seeing it with my client base. A second great resignation is around the corner. That's my take.
Interesting. I'm not seeing that yet, but it's perfectly possible. I tell you what I did see last year, I'm thinking about that point is, and part of it was driven by necessity, is I've never spoken to by a country mile as many sales leaders as I spoke to last year who were looking to leave their roles. Not because they had to, but because a percentage of them, and I think this will be a trend, a surprisingly high percentage, not a majority, but not far off, actually not looking to go to another leadership role. Because what they realized was, actually, do you know what? I don't need all of the hassle and pressure and stress that comes with impressing investors to hit those numbers that you just said. There's vanity metrics, and I want to be able to go out and just sell. I want to sell a good product to an audience that need the product and that there's value there. And a lot of the things we've just spoken about in the last 20 odd minutes were things that, and it goes back to, if you look at them, those individuals, where they started their careers as high performing salespeople. And what they've done is they've just taken on more and more responsibility. And fundamentally, what they still are is a high performing salesperson who just has to deal with a load of other shit, to be honest.
And part of this is down to the idea that you can be a cheapskate leader and hire a player manager. The two are not necessarily, I've never really seen it work especially well because someone always loses. The manager either is overburdened and burnt out, or they tend to prioritize their quota at the end of the quarter because their job actually, there are only 3 lines on a manager's job description in my world. Hire the best people, create the conditions for them to do their best work every day, and protect them from acts of idiocy from above. If you do those 3 things, then you will have a thriving team. And you don't have to faff around with all this other rubbish. What you need to do is understand that you are dealing with human beings who come to work for their reasons and their reasons only. Customers buy for their reasons and their reasons only, and they do not give a damn about your investors or the numbers that you have to report. Now, you still have to report those numbers, but you have to start asking better questions. How do we create the conditions where our pipeline is filling itself with ideal customers and we are not wasting any time on the wrong customers? So let me just do some maths with you. The reason we run adverts is not because we want click-throughs, it's because we want revenue. Fair?
Yeah.
Okay. So if we run an advert and we get 3% click-through and 15% conversion, we fail to generate revenue 99.9955% of the time. In anybody's book, that is shit. What happens then is you pass all those leads, the 85% of the 3% that didn't close, onto sales. If they are warm inbound, that requires 6 to 11 follow-up touches to get through. If they're cold leads, that requires 33 to 46 outbound touches. And that was 2018 before 70% of the efficacy dropped off the cliff. Then sales has to chase around all of those shit leads, 99% of whom will never buy. And that's why you end up with the ludicrous situation where you have to hire armies of people to invade and interrupt people at the wrong time because there's poor thinking in terms of leadership.
Armies of junior people as well, people who aren't equipped to be able to question, why are we doing this? And does this make sense? And actually, so I was talking to a client yesterday prospective client, I will say, and their best SDR hire last year was female and mid-40s and had come from a teaching career. And I love having those conversations because I think that there's an amazing pool of talent that is completely ignored and missed because there's this hyper focus on the SDR role as a junior function, and we must hire people who are incredibly smart and have come out of the best universities and got the best degrees and academically intelligent and not without capability, but also not without experience. And so, to the point of, do we hire them or do we make them that way? The number of SDRs that I speak to within 3 years of that leaving university have had 4 roles. And all too often, the finger is pointed at the environment and where they come. And that's not always right either, because I think there has to be some ownership of, what did I do? But equally, I think that if you don't have the ability, because you're junior, to be able to question and actually look at the process and go, why are we doing this way? Why are we targeting this audience? How are we doing it? You get that from experience. I think the best SDRs I know are just that they are older. They are older and they've done it for longer and they have that ability.
Well, last year, 73%, Benjamin Dennehy posted this, he said 73% of Gen Zs had ghosted an employer. Now, a lot of the people were on there saying that it was down to generational stuff and them not really appreciating how lucky they are, blah, blah, blah. Same shit that was thrown at me when I was a kid. And what's really fascinating is I think it's something far more fundamental. I think the contract between employers and employees in tech has been massively abused. And now there is very little trust.
Great.
And SDRs justifiably want employers who look after them, who develop them and grow them and create an environment where they can have a voice, where they are heard, where there is real purpose, where they have choice and agency. But instead, what they've got is this thing that tries to crush them and compress them. And I call it the tyranny of the playbook. And you've got all this metrics madness where, you're constantly worrying about staying up at night, thinking, have I got the right metrics? Am I going to get fired? And what a waste of energy. Why not simply ask, what is it that our customers come to us for? What's the promise? How do we help them achieve the outcome that they want? And in doing that, build every single job with a window to the customer, whatever part of the business you're in, whether you're in a sales role or whether you're in operations or finance. If you don't understand how you affect the customer, then there is a problem because you are part of a system. And if part of the system is sick, it's going to create repercussions elsewhere. I think the problem starts with first principles. We begin with the customer and we build out from there. How do we align what we want with what they need and they're asking for? And how do we create the bridges so that the two of us end up as partners? Now, the best recruiters I know have been working with their customers for decades. Yeah. Same thing with the best salespeople in all 26 verticals, because they treat prospecting as an exercise in finding a customer for life. So help me understand this. As a recruiter, I think we've got to really start valuing the whole process of recruitment. We've got to start it much, much sooner. I think we should be educating managers to build a bench so that we never, ever have any position that falls vacant and it takes less than a month to fill it. And there's probably enough time to create a handover so that the person leaving can do a proper handover to the person taking over the territory. But instead, everything is reactive. Recruitment, as if it's a chore, it's the single most important function any manager has.
I think you referenced the lack of trust. That is fundamental. So there's a real disconnect and a real issue at the moment that we face a lot, which is that companies, when they give a list of requirements and they're looking to hire, it doesn't matter what level actually. It doesn't matter what level actually, really, apart from entry level. One of the things that they prioritize above anything else is tenure within roles. Nobody wants to hire a job hopper. That's the term. That's been the same forever. That's been the same since I started in 2007, and it still is today. Yeah, people don't want to hire anyone who moves around too much. And certainly when I started, people didn't as much. In those broader industries that I recruited into, be it as B2B sales, but across a number of different functions, there was less movement. The problem that we have now, the disconnect, is that the requirement is still the same, and yet in the last 4 or 5 years within tech and SaaS, probably longer than that, but certainly specifically I've seen in the last 4 or 5 years, is a complete breakdown of trust in the employer to employee. And so what happens is that there is no tenure. People move every year to 18 months. And I speak to candidates regularly and I go, well, you've had 3 jobs in the last 4 years. And they go, well, that's normal, isn't it? That's not unusual. I got to a point where there was no other opportunity for me to progress or, list of reasons for leaving. There as long as you're on. And so I left. And so, I left and then I found another job. That's completely normal. And so there's this disconnect where, to your point around having a bench for recruitment, of course, absolutely you should have that. But it's difficult to do when you've got this kind of fluidity of movement where everyone's just moving all the time and the trust isn't there. So
I'm going to call you out on this though. There are managers out there who are doing it successfully.
There are. That's true. They're very much in the minority, because what happens is of course, everyone, whenever I work on a role, I say, what's the time frame to hire? And everyone says yesterday. And I'm like, okay, that's great. But you do realize that you've just given me this list of requirements, and it's probably going to take, I think, 2 months of work to get you the right shortlist. And then you're going to have to manage an interview process. And then they're going to have a notice period. And actually, if you're an experienced AE or equivalent now, you're probably on a 3-month notice period. So realistically, this requirement that you have today, you're looking at 6 months. 6 months is when that person's going to start. And that conversation is always, I do not understand this, but whenever I frame it that way, people go, no, I need to be quicker. I have to. And I'm like, well, you tell me how I'm supposed to speed this process up. The way that you speed it up is that you have a bench. But then the trust needs to be with the recruiter, because if I think about it from my perspective, am I going to ask one of my team to be constantly just working in the background, building a bench for
Why would they not pay you a monthly
a
retainer?
retainer?
And again, this is about recruiters learning how to sell, because God knows they're not very good at it either. The reality is that what most people do is they try and pitch for a vacancy because they're desperate, because their pipeline is weak, because they're all transactional and they're all focused on the short term. If you think as your customer, as a recruiter, what they want is to hire someone who succeeds in the role, fits in, improves over time, and stays. They do not want to make a hire. However, if you accept, I want to hire someone sharpish, and then you acquiesce to that, then chances are you're doing them a disservice, and you're probably going to have quite a high turnover rate. And if they make it through the 3-month guarantee, you'll be lucky, because people don't really care about the things that employers tell us that they think they care about, because if they did, they wouldn't try and use money as the primary driver to drive salespeople. Interestingly enough, because as a headhunter of 10 years, money usually came fifth or sixth. What was most important was feeling valued. Second was the commute, when we had to commute. Yeah. Third was this the job I was sold? Do I like my boss? Is he or she an arse? These were things that were far more important than money.
I completely agree. One of the other things that I would say that is overlooked a surprising amount of time, especially with hiring managers and more junior roles, and it definitely impacts on tenure, is not necessarily what are you selling, but it's definitely who are you selling to? Who's the audience that you're selling to? No one ever thinks about that. Nobody ever thinks about that. And I always use the example when I speak to candidates. I'm like, let me give you an example. My audience is largely sales and marketing leaders. They're the people that I want to speak to the most. And I know that the reason I've stayed in this industry for so long and will continue in this industry for the rest of my career is because I enjoy having conversations with those people. I have a natural synergy. It's a massively important part of the job for me, is that I have those conversations across about lots of different things, but I enjoy it. I would not be very good if I was having to if my audience were a different type of profile of character. Sales and marketing leaders I tend to gel with, I engage with, I find there's commonality there. I'm not sure that I would have that if it was necessarily, let's say, CTOs or CFOs or whatever it might be. And I think too many, again, more junior candidates, but not always junior candidates, just say, I'll take an SDR role within this business because they're a shiny company, they've raised lots of money, they're whatever those things are. And I say to them, well, did you enjoy what you were selling? Did you enjoy who you're speaking to? And invariably they say no. I think, well, that's on the hiring manager, because the hiring manager needs to be qualifying that better and working out, well, actually, if our product is to sell this to this audience, then I need to find people who are going to resonate. That's going to resonate.
I was on a call this morning for the seller code, and one of my old clients, the guy called Kieran Cron, he's just left HubSpot or leaving HubSpot, and for 8 years or so, he's been there. And what's really interesting is when he took on management role, he'd come from 5 years of running partner relationships. So he invested most of his time in coaching his people. But it started in the recruitment process where he asked them, what is it that you want to accomplish in life? That's the number that you have to generate. In order to be able to do that, You have to earn this amount of commission for you to do that. And then he built a personal cookbook that was tied directly to their personal motivation, because people come to work for their reasons, not your reason. And this is where I think job descriptions really need a very quick look, which is if there is a line in a job description for a manager and it says must be able to motivate a team, that demonstrates to you as a recruiter and you as a leader that your HR people and your hiring manager know nothing about psychology. You cannot motivate anyone to do anything ever. You can brutalize, you can bully, you can try and incentivize, but the reality is they will still do it for their reasons and their reasons only. And then they will have to make the choice to pull the trigger or push someone into the oven. The reality is that people may feel that pressure, but that is a choice that we can make if we prepare for it. And part of the problem is that we don't spend anywhere near enough time preparing because we spend most of our time busy doing. So I think one of the most important qualities that we should be looking for in managers is developing people, developing themselves. And the skills we should be looking for are powerful questioning, deep listening, real empathy, business acumen applied in context. Other qualities, high levels of self-awareness. But instead, what do? We fixate on call rate and other shit that means nothing in the grand scheme of things. And when you align with someone's real driver, the reason they come to work, and this is the question I would always ask: what is it you want your career in sales to give you in life? Okay, how do you propose to get it? Would you like to put together a plan that we will work on together to help you accomplish that? What's the next role that you need to move into in order to make that possible?
Do you think that naturally lends itself more to smaller, higher performing teams? And the reason I say that is that if you look at SDR functions, what we were seeing 2 years ago is an SDR manager running a team of 10, 12, 14 SDRs, all again, fairly early on in their careers, all being paid, say 30, 35, 40K base salaries, huge cost, huge company cost. And actually, when you really dug into it, you found out that about 10, 12, 14, maybe a third were actually performing. And when I say performing, I don't just mean actually hitting their metrics. I mean actually doing well in the job and thriving in the job. And 2/3 were not for various different reasons. I also think that, to your point, to be a truly empathetic leader, to really understand your team, to really spend that time developing them, I don't think it's possible to do that with it. I think it's very hard. Let's say that. I don't think many people would have the skill and the time to be able to do that effectively across a large team.
Why would we need a large team if we've got a small team that's highly effective? When I wrote Making Channel Sales Work, one of the things we focused on was building a special forces unit, not an army of conscripts. I think there is going to be a seismic shift in the industry fairly soon, because AI has obviously crashed onto the scene. And lots of SDRs are using it to be more invasive, more interruptive, and more useless than ever. But what's really interesting is how investors are likely to respond. In the last 6, 7 years, 27,000 tech companies in the MarTech and sales tech stack appeared. Many of those, I suspect, at risk because of AI. So
Completely.
I imagine a large amount of private equity will flood out of AI and SaaS and move into safer sectors. And that's going to result in massive layoffs. So again, I may be wrong, but I'm an old curmudgeon, and this is my 8th recession. And history tells me that investors and people who see human beings as numbers on a balance sheet tend to behave pretty shittily in these times.
Yes. Yeah, I agree. I also think, I meet a lot of people who I think, a lot of people fall into careers in sales, and most people fall into careers in sales. Once you get so far in, sure, you have responsibilities, bills to pay, all of the pressures of life. But I think that a lot of those people if you said to them honestly, do you enjoy what you do? Or are you good at what you do? Early on, sales is hard.
We make it hard.
I knew you were going to say that. I knew you were going to say that. We do make it hard, but I do think there are some characteristics that you need in order to be successful. And I think that there's a percentage of people who are currently in sales roles now, probably bigger than I think, who, if there were other careers, would happily take other careers if they could do it without earning the money.
What is the function? What's the job to be done of a salesperson?
The job to be done of a salesperson, well, is to win new customers.
I disagree. I think that's a symptom of empowering the right type of customers to make the right decision for themselves consistently and predictably so they feel safe in that decision. Because the only thing they care about ultimately is, am I going to make the right decision for me?
Yeah.
So if we introduce anything that causes it to become seller-centric, we become selfish, short-term, transactional, coercive, manipulative, that triggers the buyer's brain and it goes into freeze, flight, or fight. Now, I can't see any situation where the buyer freezing or you freezing can serve the sale or the relationship, where either one of you decide to flee or hide. That's not good. And if the buyer decides to pick a fight with you, that's probably going to end badly for you, because all they have to do is say no or ghost you, which happens to 60% of pipeline. Over half of that, 52% of the 60%, ends up there because we as sellers complicate things by trying to convince the buyer not to hesitate, instead of welcoming the moment as an invitation to intimacy and to listen. They've just said, I don't feel safe, if they hit you with an objection. So all you do is you say, that sounds important. Let's talk about it. And shut the fuck up instead of all this other rubbish. That's objection handling done.
This leads me on to a point that sales methodologies, there are loads. I remember my first sales job being taught spin back in 20 plus years ago.
Great system at the time.
Yeah, 100%. The prevalence, definitely now, I'd say the most common that I see is medpic, variations of. And well, as they would, those who use it say that it works incredibly well. And so when I'm looking to hire for roles, that clients say, well, yeah, I'd really like somebody who's already been through this training, they understand medic, etc. There is a part of me again, though, that feels that by doing that, it overcomplicates.
It definitely does. I mean, what a buyer wants is someone who has their best interests at heart, is going to tell them the truth and be transparent. And if they're about to hurt themselves, will alert them to it. And they act as if they are equals, but with different roles in service of the customer's outcome. But I would define selling as one thing, which is to empower buyers to make the right decision. That's it. And when you do that, then you stop trying to convince. Because I think what we should be doing is engaging them and then educating them. But we can't educate them if we're short term, because we don't have the time and we're told by Sandler, for example, sell today, educate tomorrow. I taught that for 16 years. And in a transactional environment, it makes sense. But if I'm trying to create a lifetime relationship with someone, trying to convince them to buy so I can make quitter or pay for my kitchen, is self-serving and poses me as a threat. They need to be able to articulate the solution themselves, because they're going to have to sell it internally. They need to be able to justify it to themselves. They need to be empowered to make the right decision. They need to be encouraged and enabled, because I want them to continue buying year after year. If you've got a 15% churn rate, you have to replace 49% of your customers every 3 years. You know how bloody hard it is to get one in at the top cold. Why would you do that to yourself? So the question we have to ask is, what am I doing to cause buyers not to buy? How am I hiring for that? And that's where the playbooks come in. These systems were all developed before the year 2000. And since then, we've had a lot of neuroscience and behavioral psychology research that tells us how the brain actually works. I've created a contrast list between behaving in the customer's interest and then using classic techniques, like, for example, the dummy curve, negative reverse selling, any of your pressure techniques, for example, the use of scarcity or false urgency. All of these things create dissonance in the buyer's brain. Why would we do that? So I'm going to do a series on the podcast called Caveat Venditor. So buyer beware. And it's just the one thing that you can do to cause your buyer to stop wanting to buy from you. Don't do that.
Fascinating.
And what matters most to your customers?
What matters most to my customers?
Yeah.
Making the right decision, probably.
There you go. They want to make a great hire. So design that hire with them. When I was in recruitment, and since then I've done a lot of recruitment for clients, I love designing the ideal candidate who will be successful, and then working backwards 3 years, 2.5 years, 2 years, 1.5 years, 1 year, 6 months, 3 months, 1 month, a week, day one.
Yeah.
What is it that on day one they need to know? By when do they need to know it? To what standard? How will it be measured? What will they be in control of? If they're not 100% in control of it, it doesn't go in the onboarding. Okay. Are we hiring for what we cannot train? Or are we just looking for the same old shit and taking the same job description that we just fired someone from and then going looking for an identical hire? That to me seems a little bit daft.
One of the things that I really enjoy doing is working to create a hiring process that actually makes sense. And thankfully, a lot of companies now are ditching the third stage interview or second stage interview, which is we'd like this person to present whatever it might be for 15 to 20 minutes about something, either their current business and just framing that whole stage of that process in a very different way.
Well, is that how you want your salespeople to sell? I would much prefer to start the interview with, Lloyd, really been looking forward to meeting you. Over to you.
Yeah.
If they've got a plan, it comes into action. If they haven't got a plan, how well do they respond under pressure and on their feet? Because those are two qualities I absolutely have to hire for, and I ain't going to be developing that. So my interview's done and dusted inside of a minute. Yeah. When's it okay to lie to a customer, Lloyd? Yeah. Any hesitation tells me that that is somebody who would consider lying to a customer. Yeah. If you are customer centric, you can never lie to your customer. So design the candidate. I've got a great exercise. Take a blank sheet of paper and write down all the qualities that have made people in this role successful historically in this type of economy. That's the important thing. Okay. So when someone is under pressure, when they have customers who have scarcity mindset, who are afraid, what sort of person needs to show up for them?
Yeah.
What are the qualities that make somebody a predictable success in this role? Okay, well, let's look for those qualities. And I can tell you now, it is not going to be their dial rate, or their ability to churn out shifty emails at scale. It's going to be about their ability to build relationships and earn trust, create the conditions where people invite them in. We've got to start thinking about the metrics. If we can insist on measuring certain things, our salespeople will try to satisfy that because that keeps them in a job. So what are the metrics you would say we need to start measuring? Because you're really good at the relationship piece. What now constitutes meaningful and important work? If we were to take out the busy work and just focus on the important, meaningful work in your role, let's focus on that.
In my role, what are the things
in
you
your
need to
role?
focus on?
Yeah.
The most important thing in my role, in order to build trust with customers, the metric is actually how much time you spend in front of them.
Who knew?
Who
the fuck knew that time in front of the customer was the most important thing?
But in person, for me anyway.
Yeah. Why?
Trust.
Because
you get to know the person, you get to ask questions, you get to build, you find out and cover things off in person that I just don't think you ever get the chance to on a phone call. And you're captive, so they can't go anywhere. They can't be distracted by anything. You're there, and you're having. And it's I think you said about intimacy, and it is intimate. You forget how intimate it is to sitting one-to-one with somebody in person.
What confidences are they sharing with you? Their hopes, their fears, their aspirations, what they're concerned about, how they feel vulnerable and exposed. You can't do that by trying to cold call them and in 13 seconds convince them to take your call and then 3 minutes later to agree to a meeting and then buy from you. That's not how trust happens in real human relationships. So back to that triangle, the emphasis is on the relationship. So I think what matters is engagement, frequency of touch, quality of touch, not volume. I would much rather you work with maybe 20 dream accounts, and over the next 6 to 36 months, your objective is to enlist half a dozen of them as customers. That's all. And do everything you possibly can to build relationships deep and wide. So when they move from passive to active looking, you know all the moving parts. You understand the political ramifications. You understand what each individual wants. That's what great strategy is about. That's how you build great lifetime customer relationships. And you crush your number. With the caller I was on with Kieran, in 8 years, he missed quota 1 month. 8 years. Yeah, that's a lot of months.
Yeah.
That's 95 months out of 96. Pretty impressive in SaaS. Why? Because he actually put the customer before himself. He never allowed pressure from above cause him to put the customer at a disadvantage so he could get a win. Now, how do we create the conditions where managers start thinking like that and recruiting for those qualities?
Once you do, then there's a lot of problems solved, that's for sure.
95% of your management problems disappear if you don't hire the wrong person.
So, yeah, hiring, finding the right person is forgotten because it's, did they tick all of these boxes? So finding the right person. And actually some of the most successful relationships I've had over the last few years in terms of quality of hiring have just been, it makes sense why, but actually one of the best is with somebody who's 45 years in sales leadership and gives me some requirements, but they're not set in stone. It's just, I need, the kind of person that I want to hire. And so consequently, over the last 3 years, they've hired 6 people and all 6 people are still there and doing really well.
And how much of that was down to your customer intimacy, being intimate not only with the customer, but also the culture of the business, the other people, the different moving parts. Because all of us, if we're selling anything that's moderately high ticket or strategic, then we are selling into wicked problems. Wicked problems have 4 fundamental rules, which is whatever you try first doesn't work. The rules change as you go. The stakeholders differ, and whatever you end up with is imperfect. So you have to keep going. All wicked problems are very complex problems that haven't yet been broken down into simple parts. If we remove the stuff that we don't need to do, so what's stuff we look for that we don't need to look for? If we take that out of the equation and we focus on habits, what are the habits that will make someone successful in the role for which you are hiring? What are the values that will mean that when they make a decision and filter it through those values, I can trust them to protect the customer, protect the company, and protect the brand? What are their abilities to adapt, to learn? How do they adapt to context? Because contextual adaptation is vital because you're dealing with lots of different people, CTOs, heads of sales, finance, operations. And you might have to work out who all these different moving parts are, even though they may not be directly involved in the sale. They're affected by it. Now, if you then are involved in moving the customer or helping the customer move from passive to active looking to deciding, their voices, their fingerprints are all over the solution, and everyone else is competing with the customer's design whilst they're trying to pitch in the short term. Now, to my mind, this seems to be a far more effective use of everybody's time, and the customer wins out as well. Your thoughts?
My thoughts is that people have moved too far away from having a people-centric hiring process and forgotten that we're actually engaging with human beings and really understanding those human beings and what are their true drivers and motivators and what is their story and where did they grow up and what they learn from their parents and who are their inspirations and all of those kind of things, especially at an early stage in your career, are fundamental to the type of person that you're going to bring into the business. But and as that goes on, if I look at the most successful hirers that I work with, they're far more interested in those things than they are about, because products, you can focus on products and what they've sold and who they've sold to and all those kind of things, great, but products change. You can focus on the market that they've been selling into, but markets change. You can be working for the right business at the right time, selling a great product to a great market, and suddenly that market completely changes and that person underperforms for a year. It doesn't mean that they're a bad salesperson. It just means that they've been in a tricky environment, in a different situation. But I see so many hiring managers reading too much into underperformance and not taking it in the context of the wider situation and understanding why did you.
Again, from Ebster and Pavilion's data from last year on $3 billion worth of pipeline, only 27% of salespeople hit quota, and around 40% hit 80% of quota. Now, let's be honest. Many of them did so because they're not competent yet, because they don't know how to do it any other way. But many of them suffered because of overassignment of quota. When you tot up everyone's quota, it comes to 300% of the number that the company needs to hit. And the company hits their quota, but the people who make them successful are then punished and penalized. My thinking is, because I do a lot of work with Gen Z and millennials, and what they're looking for is real choice. They want agency in their life. They want to work with purpose, with companies that have a purpose they can get behind, and they want meaningful, lasting relationships that help them to grow and within which they can help others to grow. This is a generation that actually has moral fiber and cares about stuff. And employers who don't understand that thinking and what drives them are massively at risk of, first of all, underutilizing them. Because what is the point in hiring these very clever people if you don't give them a voice and you try and push them into some system and stifle any form of creativity? So we need to create the environment for people to want to come to work with you. I've been developing this Inspire recruitment model specifically for Gen Zs, targeting them so that they're clearly valued, because this is a resource that you want to keep. Job hopping's a pain in the ass. It's expensive. And if I have to replace someone, I have to go through the recruitment costs, I have to go through the interviews, all of that. And then they have to ramp up. That's expensive and cost me hundreds of thousands from my target. So why not develop people? So one of the ideas that I have, and I'd love to talk to you about, is if we were to partner up and instead of paying a recruitment fee, for as long as that person stayed in the company, they pay a monthly fee. And for they get coaching and training ongoing, because you want to hire someone who will succeed in the role, improves over time, and stays and fits in. Well, we can ensure that. And it may take 2 years to get a full recruitment fee. But if we're getting paid for 10 years, I'm up for that. What do you say?
I discussed this model. I looked at this a couple of years ago without the coaching, admittedly, just the financial model of paying for somebody just to stay. And I spoke to, I don't know, let's say 10 fairly senior sales leaders and said, what do you think? And unanimously, they said, yeah, I'd be very interested in that. Now, at the time, it wasn't something that we could do because it requires a real change of kind of business strategy. And there are a few reasons, but yeah, I agree. And I actually think, and I've seen people try to marry the coaching and the hiring, the old kind of Pareto law recruitment agency been around forever, especially with hiring entry-level salespeople. That's a kind of short-term kind of there's a couple of weeks of sales training and then you hire somebody and you think they're going to be much better. I don't agree with that. But yeah, the idea that you could hire somebody and for as long as they stay in your business, you just pay a monthly fee to keep that person, but also that person gets trained and coached.
And career
Yeah,
path. That's the
completely.
important part, because thinking about this, you want to have a good succession plan. The way I'm thinking about this is there's a model that I have, which is 5Ds. So doing, deciding, delegating, designing, and developing. And as you move around the model clockwise and the developing is in the middle, you're effectively 10xing the contribution per hour of the employee. But then there's highbrow and lowbrow. Lowbrow doing is basically busy work. Highbrow doing delivers $10,000 an hour to the business. Okay. So working out how we can create jobs where people are contributing the highest value they can, and they are being developed into the next skill by delegating properly, because managers have a tendency to delegate by abdication. So they just dump it on someone and then blame them in the same way that they hire badly and then blame the salespeople. Well, I think what we should be doing is creating the conditions where we have a much smaller pool of candidates. We develop those on a bench. We then cultivate them where there's 120-day onboarding plus 30 days whilst they're on gardening leave. So they've got a 150-day ramp. They hit the ground running. We set them up to succeed. And then there is a career path that is driven by their motivation and what they want from life, answering the question, what do you want your career in sales to give you in life? And they can go any direction they like. They can go into management, stay in sales, move into channel, set their own business up. But the job of the manager is to cultivate and develop those people so that there's always strength within the business and anyone can step in there.
I love it.
So on that note, now that we've given away our business plan, but there's a lot of work that has to go into it, so feel free to steal it. Then, Lloyd, tell me this. You've got a golden ticket and you can go back and you can whisper into the ear of the idiot 23-year-old who knew everything and was immortal and invincible. What one bit of choice advice would you give him that he would have ignored but would have benefited from?
I think that I was and definitely am a very emotionally and personally self-aware individual. And when I was 23, I was determined to stifle emotion and not be an emotional person. And I think that really hindered both personal relationships and work relationships and led me on a path of thinking that I wanted to do certain things and be a certain person. And actually, for me personally anyway, the advent of having children fairly recently has led to me understanding actually I'm very, very good at understanding people, and I have a high level of emotional intelligence and being able to understand when something's not right with other people, but also understanding when something's not right with me. And I just put that aside for a long time. So yeah, that's quite a deep one, but it's something that I reflect back on. And I think things might have been different, or in my 20s might have been different if I'd have listened to that a bit more and tried to not box it away.
In all honesty, what buyers really pick up on is authenticity. I did much the same. I was trying to conform to the image and stereotype of a great salesperson, but actually it just turned me into an arsehole. And it's also a path to self-destruction. You're outwardly successful and you're getting all the material trappings, but inside you're feeling hollow. And the tendency then is to numb. Food, alcohol, drugs, sex, gambling, risk-taking, shopping, exercise. Yeah. And look at the number of people in our industry who are broken like that. That is irresponsible. If you're a shareholder and you really care about shareholder value, I strongly suggest that you take greater care of your people, because when the pandemic broke out, 60% of managers had a health-threatening condition that was stress-induced by the job. They have 7 to 8 people reporting to them on average, who you're paying 30, 40, 50 grand, and they carry a quota of X millions of pounds. They're an asset. They're not a cost. Look after your people and develop good managers who know how to develop people, not who know how to stick to metrics.
Completely. I think the authenticity piece is something that's, again, you summarized it much better than I did actually, but it's running an authentic, a business that's really built on authenticity, and hiring people who value that is more important to me now than probably anything work-wise. I care a lot more than I realized about doing great work, and actually that people hopefully think that I have done great work, and hiring people that I can see develop and that they achieve whatever their goals are. So I listened to a podcast the other day actually, and they said, what would success be for you? And the example that the person gave, and they were a successful, very hugely successful business person. And they said, success for me is being able to sit down when I'm 70 years old with my grandchildren and say to them that I did a fantastic job and I helped a lot of people. And those kind of things, I think, more and more motivate me. So,
well, interestingly enough, there's a fascinating book called How to Measure Your Life by Clay Christensen.
okay.
I strongly urge everyone to have a read of that. The other book I would strongly recommend is Giving Voice to Values by Mary Gentile. And you're going to have to do that more and more in this economy, because this is my 8th recession, and the following is going to happen. People will discount needlessly and prematurely. You will feel the scarcity and pressure from above, which will result in you putting your customers under pressure needlessly and causing them to hesitate. The middle of your pipeline will fatten up and get constipated because of behavior that you are creating the conditions to trigger in your buyer's brain to see you as a threat. You're going to be encouraged by senior management to do things that are not in your buyer's best interest, like, for example, getting them to buy before they're ready. If you do that, you need to remember that you are sacrificing your reputation, your word, for a moment's relief for a transaction. That customer may never come back. If you handle it well, it could be a customer for the next 30, 40, 50 years, because most of you listening probably have another 50 years ahead of you. Think about how much business you could do with a handful of customers, and you only have to add 1 or 2 a year instead of having to call 20,000 people a decade. It's just not worth it.
Good advice.
Excellent. Lloyd, how can people get hold of you?
LinkedIn, probably the best way, I would say. I'm, as any recruiter is, I'm on LinkedIn 24/7. I'm always up for talking to people, trying to help people. Drop me a message on there, and I respond to everybody. So, yeah, LinkedIn is definitely the best way.
Lovely. Lloyd Stokes, thank you.
Marcus, thank you very much.
My pleasure. So this is Marcus Cauchi signing off once again from the Inquisitor podcast. Please like, comment, share, and subscribe. If you feel the urge, leave a review, 1 star or 5 star, don't care, just tell the truth. And if you're somebody who was a top performer, but then last year, everything fell off the cliff, and you've been trained in the likes of Sandler or Medic or Richardson or gap selling, and it's just not working as it used to, then drop me a line. At the bottom, there's a link to my selling aptitude test. There'll be 3 outputs from it: your selling aptitude, your pipeline certainty, and your buyer safety score. If you choose to, I'll give you half an hour for free, and I won't even try and sell you coaching. If you want to talk about coaching, ask me. We can talk about it after, and I'll just give you some feedback. You'll learn one thing you don't know about yourself, something you can do in the next 30 days to ensure that in the next 90 days, your pipeline starts to look healthier, and stuff that you can do over the course of 12 months without my help to improve your performance permanently. So if that's something that you'd like to do, then click the link. In the meantime, stay safe and happy selling. Bye-bye.